I think hope is only earned when we inform ourselves about the truth, whether it's local, regionally, nationally, internationally, and that you get out the front door and you go do whatever it is that you can to try to mitigate that on any level. Because again, in the absence of that, who are we when we know what's taking place now? And the urgency and the tragedy of it. What does it mean to be human if we are not willing to jump into the fray?
I'm Adam Vaughan, the environment editor for The Times, and it's my pleasure today to be joined by Kris Tompkins from New York. Kris, I know who you are and I'm a big fan of you. Please introduce yourself for people who don't know you.
Well, my name is Kris Tompkins, and I'm the president and co-founder of Tompkins Conservation. We work on large-scale conservation, largely in Chile and Argentina, and we rewild, bring back species that have been extirpated or are extincted, or whose numbers are low and fragile. And I'm the former CEO of Patagonia company, and that's it.
That's it? Nothing else, really? You just protected loads of land and set up a big clothing company? Honestly, I'm going to dispense with the small talk and just go straight in, Kris, on a big question. So, what's the most important issue in conservation today, do you think? What is the big pressing issue?
I think the extinction crisis in terms of the non-human world is probably the one that's on the fastest track downward. And we're losing territory at such a phenomenal rate, whether it's through agriculture or certainly livestock. I think the figure today is that human-related activities make up 96% of the globe today, leaving 4% for the non-human world. So yeah, I mean, personally, I think there are a lot of things in that statement, but yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny how this sort of, in fact, you know, the climate crisis as a phrase is sort of very much travelled beyond, you know, the sort of world of environmentalists, but the idea there being a sixth extinction, I think, would be, the sixth mass extinction would be sort of something that's not, if you went to most, you know, a pub where I'm in London or a bar where you are in New York, probably most people wouldn't have heard of. What do you, just on brass tacks, what, you know, on definitions, what does it mean to you to be a conservationist? I know that's almost a bit elementary, but a lot of people answer that in different ways.
I think that if you believe that all life has intrinsic value, if you actually believe that, then that forces you to reevaluate virtually everything that you do and the order in which you do them, and what are the great moral dilemma that we face as humans. So in my husband Doug Tompkins' world and mine, we came out of business and we thought, okay, we want to shift our lives, the last third of our lives, we're going to do something completely different. And for us, you can't swing a cat without hitting somebody who's involved in climate change work. And so we've decided to throw our backs into acquiring, aggregating huge tracts of land and marine systems, and make them permanently protected, make them accessible to everyone, and bring back species who were in trouble. And that's that. You know, everybody steps up to the front line wherever you think you can do the most good, and in our case, I think that's it.
Got you. That's really clear. And in terms of the where of that, a lot of your work's been carried out in South America, particularly Chile and Argentina. I mean, I was lucky enough to go to Chile and see some of the natural world there, but I haven't been to Argentina. For those people who don't know either, what's the right word here? What's sort of precious and important about the ecosystems there? Give people a little bit of a sense of what those parts of the world are like. Yeah, those two countries.
So on the Chilean side, it's facing west, so that's the Pacific side. You have extensive temperate rainforests that have been cut and over the last couple hundred years. And you also have the Patagonia steppe grasslands, which are kind of famous and romantic, and people love the idea of the Patagonia territory. But the fact is, in a mere century, those fragile, semi-arid grasslands have been cut back to almost nothing. And so we saw an opportunity in a territory on the earth that we really identify with and had come to love, to try to help patch those steppe grasslands back together and protect a lot of the temperate rainforest that was in the gun sight of logging, largely international loggers.
And on the Argentina side?
In the south, in the Patagonia region, they have the vast percentage of the steppe grasslands, so same thing. And then we started working on the coasts of both countries. We believe that coastal territories in any country are sort of forgotten sometimes, but largely where you find the most complex combination of sea and land biodiversity. And then we work up, since 2000, up in the northeastern territory of Argentina that faces Brazil, Paraguay, Bolivia, and that's a gold mine of biodiversity. And that's where we really started realizing that rewilding extirpated species would become half of what we do, even though we had started in Chile. That's where that work really took fire.
Got you. And I've turned 45 today. I think you're 73. Is that right?
Yes.
And yeah, just casting your mind back a bit in time, I wondered, where did your sort of love for the natural world come from? Did you have some big epiphany, or was it more of a gradual thing? Was it to do with your upbringing? Where did it come from?
It's a good question, and I don't have a really romantic answer. We grew up on our great-grandfather's ranch in California, passed down through the family. So we were outside all the time, but we never thought about it being outside. We were just kicked outside all day to play and to go do chores and things. I think early on I was a ski racer and a climber, and when you start going to places like Yosemite National Park and some of the iconic protected areas in the United States, I think those places really teach you a lot about things you have no understanding of. And beauty. You get out into places, and if you're lucky enough, you're with somebody who really invites you to stop and just understand what you're looking at. That beauty is, you don't feel those things when you're really young. I never thought about beauty, but I learned to understand that I was just one species in a big ring of others, probably in my early 20s. I wasn't that young.
Yeah. Yeah, I always sort of envy the people who said that they had a wonder for the natural world in their, as a child, because it's beyond sticklebacks and stuff. I'm not sure I did. Just look at your career. I mean, it's a fascinating career you've had. I mean, prior to being the full-time conservationist, you were the CEO of the outdoor clothing brand Patagonia, which many people will know. what they might not know is how that came about. Can you just, for people who don't know the story, can you just tell them how that came about?
Well, Yvon Chouinard, who is the owner and founder of Patagonia, I met when I was 15. It's a long story. And
I'm here for the long story.
And so I was starting my university years, and in our family, you had to have a job summertime, even though your studies were paid for and so on. So I was complaining to Yvon one day, oh God, I have to get a job. What am I going to do? I don't know how to do anything. And he said, well, come and work for me at the blacksmith shop. He was making technical rock and ice climbing equipment. So I did, and in the ensuing summers, I worked for him, cutting rope, finishing off pitons and so on. And then when I graduated, also in our family, you're cut off the minute your degree touches the end of your fingers. So then I was really in trouble because I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I went back and said, oh God, you have to hire me because so I was a shipper for him. I shipped stuff.
Boxed stuff up, right?
Boxed stuff up.
Yeah.
And then a year in, the first year, second year, he said, I think we should start making clothing for ourselves. And he had these ideas for designs and new fabrics, you know, and at that point you were still using wool and, you know, it gets wet, you're miserable. And so he said, I want to start making clothing and I want to call it Patagonia because he and my husband, Doug, had gone on an emblematic climbing trip in 1968. Took him 6 months to drive down and put up a route on Fitzroy down in Patagonia, which is very famous alpine climb. So we named this new clothing company Patagonia, and he said to me, oh, I think, why don't you just do this? Why don't you just take care of this? So I said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. I had no idea. Neither one of us did. So I ran around looking for the very best people. The head of one of the big banks in Los Angeles who in those days was the biggest banker in fashion world and so on, and knocked on his door and said, I'm going to build this company, but what should I be thinking about? Who should I know? And that's how we got started. And I ran it for, I don't know, the first 25 years, and of that probably 18, 19 years as, well, I was always the general manager, and then we decided that outwardly facing, I needed to be called the CEO because that's what people recognized. It didn't matter to me. That's how it happened, and it grew like crazy, and it was fun, and it was difficult, and I love things that start at zero, where you really have no experience. You know what you want, but you have no understanding of how to get there.
It's interesting you talking about the materials outdoor clothes used to be made of. I was reporting on the Everest climb anniversary recently, and you know, I was like, can't believe they were wearing these things. You know, the wool. I mean, back then, we take for granted now, don't we? A lot of these technical materials, but presumably back at the time, that was a whole different way of thinking about things.
Absolutely. If you look at the history of climbing in the Alps, anywhere in Europe, and they're wearing 75 pounds of leather and oiled cotton, and oh my God.
So what, over those years at Patagonia, what would you say, I'm sure there were lots, but do you want to pull out like one or two lessons that you learned, you know, that helped your later career as a conservationist? I know you were, in a way, you were being a conservationist then, but, you know, what did you learn from there that's helped you since?
Well, I can safely say that in the mid-'70s, Yvon and Melinda Chouinard are the reasons that I had any remotely accurate idea about what was happening out in nature and the need to more actively fight against those trends. that's one thing I learned. And really the second thing as well, by the early 80s, Yvonne said, let's turn the company into an activist tool. So whatever we do inside the company, we're splitting it and go and fund those environmental groups that are too radical, too far forward, that nobody else wants to fund them. And that's when we started saying we would give away 10% of our profits toward those environmental groups. And within a couple years, we said, well, everybody knows you can hide profits. Companies are doing it every day. So, and if you're a profitable company or you're losing money, you're still creating the same damage. So we should nick ourselves as 1% of all revenue. So regardless of how profitable we were in any particular year, so on, that's what we did, and we still do that. And you know, I think this is the great tragedy of modernity, that business has become so separate and unwilling to find itself in the middle of goodness and health in the human and non-human societies. And in the absence of that feeling of connection and responsibility, you have this wasteland that is being created that is going to cause, well, it is causing havoc around the globe. You just, and it's willful.
Yeah. What do you mean by willful?
I mean that, generally speaking, and I know that this is a very unpopular point of view, but my point of view is this. In general, leadership around the world, whether it's corporate leadership or sovereign state leadership, there is no question that they understand in great detail the issues of climate change, the triggers, the things that have to happen to try to pull back from what's taking place. They understand the degradation that's taking place, whether it's in the Sudan or the South Pacific Islands, or you name it. These guys have hundreds, if not thousands, of analysts who are analyzing futures, whether it's petroleum, you name it. And they understand absolutely, and they are willing to sacrifice not even the good of humanity, but the degradation of human and non-human systems until it collapses.
Got you.
As Jimmy Goldsmith said, you know, it's you know the ship's going down, but you're going to go down in a first-class cabin.
It's a nice way of putting it. So they know what's going on, but they do it anyway. Okay, we might come back to that. Just on the history stuff, in the 90s, you made this big decision to retire from your role at Patagonia, and Doug, your husband, who is the founder of the North Face, also stepped back. And I mean, was there... that seemed to be the point where you sort of decided, okay, we're going to go spend all our effort on climate and conservation. Was there a kind of, how did that decision unfold? Was it something you talked about for years and years and kept going, oh no, not now? Or was there finally a news story you read about or a scientific study or something and you were like, oh God, we've really got to change gears and do something differently? What was the catalyst?
Well, in my case, I can't speak for Doug, but he was with his former wife, Susie, developing Esprit by then. He sold the North Face, and Susie had started Esprit, and he got involved with that, and then they took off, became this giant success. In my case, I started working, and we started creating Patagonia when I was 22 years old. So by the time I was 40, and I was young. It was very odd to see a woman in a CEO position. And everything was fabulous, and I loved the company, and I still am at the company. But I was desperate to get out of there because I felt like if this is the sum total of my life at 40 years of age, I thought I was suffocating. I needed to do something great, something big. And I couldn't figure out what that was. And then Doug and I ran into each other down in Patagonia, actually in Argentina, in this 3-dog town. And we fell in love with one another. And he was a year or so ahead of me and feeling the same way. And he sold his half of their company back to Sous, and I had to live a different life.
That's really interesting because, I mean, I'm sort of a similar age to you back then, and, you know, I've always been a journalist, and it's still, you know, I guess I sort of imagine the suffocating bit, I guess, to a degree, but also, like, really brave to, like, sort of have all that comfortable stuff, right, and go, okay, we're just going to go for it.
Oh, I don't think I had a choice, honestly.
Right.
I think I don't want to be too dramatic about it, but it was a serious crisis that why would I leave something I love so much? And the people, or the teams, just, you know, world class, Yvonne and Melinda. But I had to go do something else. And that's it.
Sure. And that's something else. I mean, I think we're going to end up talking about land a lot, aren't we? I mean, just tell me a bit about the first bit of land you bought.
In 1992, Doug bought the first piece of property, which would become Pumalin Douglas Tompkins National Park. And I moved down there permanently in 1993. And we just kept aggregating more private land sold by individual owners and began to see that we could really, beyond our imagination, protect these vast temperate rainforests that were in the, you know, in sight to be cut eventually. And that's how we got started. We didn't really understand that we might make national parks out of them. That wasn't really clear to us on the front end. But soon after, we started to say, well, God, we're putting together a lot of land. I wonder what would happen if we could just donate them all back to the country and make national parks, because we grew up in the national parks here in the United States, and they do make a difference, and they do belong to every American, and they are, with their failures and problems. But for a country, part of its patrimony, to have the jewels of a country belong to all citizens is a very, very powerful proposition.
It sounds a little bit as well like you're sort of starting from 0 point about your kind of not necessarily knowing where it would go, but that's, at the outset. And when did you start? You talked a bit about this when we started chatting, but just talk a little bit about some of the pressures that these first areas that you started buying up were under. What was the issue?
When we first started buying land in Chile, you have to remember that we, in a fairly short time, owned land from the border of Argentina at the top of the Andes all the way down to the Pacific Ocean. So that led people to start calling us, oh, they're the couple who cut Chile in half. This is private ownership and 2 foreigners, 2 Americans. The Chileans had lived through the American impact with Allende and the dictatorship of Pinochet. So Americans weren't beloved in the first place, or not necessarily trusted. And as these lands began to grow, there were all sorts of criticisms, points of suspicion, that we were trying to create a new Jewish state, even though we had been raised Anglicans. A nuclear waste dump for the United States, an Air Force base for Argentina.
I hadn't heard that one. That was a new one to me. I remember some of this, but
that we would take out all the cattle in southern Chile and replace it with American bison, things like that. Our phones were tapped for years. We had military planes flying over us, or where we lived, and it was quite a difficult time. We took refuge in the U.S. Embassy residence a few times. And
I guess the point of this is you were effectively taking on some vested interests, right, in terms of the users of that land, was the reason you got such a big pushback.
And I think, looking back on it now, nearly 30 years ago, I think we should have expected that kind of response. As well-meaning as we were also pretty naive about how those purchases might have been absorbed into society. And it was difficult. It was very difficult. But at the same time, we learned a lot through it, that's for sure. We made a lot of mistakes, not willfully, but more naively.
One mistake what would you?
We should never have imagined that we could go in and make these kinds of moves and not anticipate such a harsh blowback.
Yeah.
Because if you look at Chile at that time, the 1990s, they're coming out of a dictatorship that's 17 years old, and they are still considered at that time to be a third world country, although coming out of it. So their whole raison d'etre was to produce, build the economy. It is finally their turn to pick themselves up and out and to be a real player, which it has done. And I just think that were we to do it again, we would have been a lot wiser. Mm-hmm. I mean, I suppose we can say that about anything in any one of our lives, but
it's a wonderful thing, isn't it? Hindsight.
Yeah.
Kris, I want to talk to you about rewilding. I mean, it's something that people talk about a lot these days. It's, I think certainly at least here in Britain is in the public discourse. I want to talk a bit more about the NGOs Rewilding Chile and Rewilding Argentina. Yes. Come on to what they do in a minute, but first of all, just what does rewilding mean to you?
For me, rewilding is acquiring a sort of a canvas, enough territory that ancient earth can recuperate on its own. And where it's impossible, where that's impossible, you step in and you help either bring back grasslands or forests, restoration work, or in terms of mammals and, well, all species, help bring them back. And in some cases, these species have been gone for up to 150 years, but they can come back. And we work with 24 species altogether. So that to me is rewilding.
Yeah, no, that's really clear. And in terms of specifics, is there a sort of single kind of most ambitious project that one of those NGOs have carried out that you'd, like to share with us?
Well, in Chile, certainly, it's the huemul deer. It's down to 1,500 individuals entirely between Chile and Argentina. It's really in desperate straits, so Chile is very much focused on that, and several other species, but that's emblematic. And in Argentina, of course, we have brought jaguars and ocelots, giant anteaters, giant river otters back, and they've been gone, say, since the 1930s. And that, technically, the most difficult species we've worked on are jaguars.
Interesting, because also the most sort of charismatic and presumably the easiest to fundraise for, but the hardest to...
I'm talking about it technically.
Yeah, I get you.
And then the macaws, because these birds exist only in private collections and zoos, and so they arrive to us, they can't fly, they don't know what to eat, so you're training giant macaws to actually be wild again.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
I can imagine. It's not as simple as it sounds.
Yeah.
And the national parks you're involved in, I mean, can you give us a sense of the scale of these? You know, give us a sense of the sort of areas we're talking about.
Altogether, between Chile and Argentina, we've helped create 15 national parks, although the 16th we just signed a couple of weeks ago in Santiago. But that requires one more step. So we'll leave it at 15 parks and just over a total of 15 million acres.
That's a lot of land. How do you even begin to manage that? How do you work with the people who do the sort of managing on the ground?
Well, we manage them until the time that we donate them back to either Chile or Argentina, and then they become national parks, and then they go within the park systems of each country. But before we donate them, it's a lot of work, because in the big ones, the emblematic parks, we also include all the infrastructure, so campgrounds, restaurant, bridges, trails, all of that is included in the gift.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier on about how when you first sort of went down and you were outsiders, and that was maybe more going against the grain than you maybe thought at the outset. I mean, why is it important to work with local people? It might seem like an obvious question, but why is it important to work with local people on these projects?
I think we have to remember that when we start a project somewhere, we're the outsiders. And I would like to remind listeners that Doug and I, on almost all the projects we've ever done, are the only foreigners. So the parks in Chile are built and designed by Chileans, and the same in Argentina by people from that country. So I think it's always really important that it's not just Doug and Kris, it's hundreds of people who create these parks, help us get them donated, and so on. Decide to commit to a project. These are projects that go 10, 20 years before they get donated back to the citizens of their country. And you have to start with the local communities. They are, as we always say, the geniuses of the place. They are the people who in 100 years, 150 years, if there's tremendous pressure to de-gazette a park or to damage it in any way, they are the people who will ultimately defend their park. And also, you want conservation, the creation of new national parks, to be economic drivers for communities everywhere who are related geographically to the park. Because if you don't do that, then you haven't really done the job you're supposed to be doing, which is to imagine healthy, dignified human communities around healthy, whole, non-human life. But if you extract one or the other away from those two things, then you're you're lousy at what you do because they're not durable. We're not trying to create just new outcomes for the non-human world. We're trying to find ourselves again as part of nature, as part of the goodness and stability for all life, not just create national parks.
Yeah, no, it's a long-term game, that thinking we're not outside nature, and also your point as well. You seem to be driving at there, which is you were saying about how when you came to Chile and it was a point of huge development. It's also about quite often the thing that's missing from these conversations on protected areas is that people need to make a living, right? And that's which you're making a nod to. I mean, do you have you were talking a minute ago about the about some of the species that you've been involved in, the ocelots and the jaguar and so on. Do you have like a favorite success story on the rewilding front in terms of a particular species?
I'd say in Chile, one of the fastest success stories is the cougar puma, because with 100 years of ranching in the Patagonia steppelands, of course, just like lions in Africa today and predators everywhere, the population of pumas had gone down to be very scarce, a lot of poisoning and all the things we know. And today, the puma populations around these territories where now there are several national parks over the border between the two countries. And now there are pumas sleeping on the steps of the museum at Patagonia National Park and hanging out happily, not aggressively. People are having dinner in the restaurant and there are pumas going by and everybody sort of keeps to themselves. So, and of course on the Argentine side, I can't help but refer to jaguars. When we started our jaguar breeding program, there had never been anything like that done anywhere in the world, and there was a lot of skepticism regarding this strategy, including from ourselves. We had no idea, but there was no other means to get started. And today we know we have at least 25 individuals some who have been free for 3 years. They're mating and reproducing in the wild, and now they're starting to disperse. One just recently went up, crossed the Paraná River, and made his way into Paraguay, which is exactly what we want, because we are changing what we're doing now. As of about 6 months ago, we made the decision in both countries to expand the impact of our work. And when I say we, when my husband died about 8 years ago, I wanted to make sure that the team in Chile and the team in Argentina were independent from us, because if something happened to me, I wanted them to not only flourish, but develop the third and fourth generations of leadership in Chile and Argentina. And we finally, we've done that. And these guys are very independent, but we still work together. I love strategy. I love, we raise money together for both distinct countries. I just got back weeks ago from a 6-week trip down there working on the ground with everybody. So anyway, those kinds of projects are good working inside a national park, but national parks are islands still. They're not big enough. Iberá National Park is almost 2 million acres, but that's not big enough when you're talking about predators. You're talking about jaguars, ocelots, anteaters, all these species. They really need to be on the move. So both countries and Tompkins Conservation decided to commit ourselves, and we already have done. We're in this now, to reconnect the continent of South America back together again ecologically, the southern cone of the continent back up to the rest of the continent.
So you've got those corridors. Yeah. And that's really interesting. Well, quite a legacy on the puma and the jaguar. I just wanted to ask, how important is Rolex support been through its Perpetual Planet initiative to rewilding Argentina and rewilding Chile?
I think it's important. Well, in a practical way, I think it's important. But I see these things as alliances that will go for decades. So I think Rolex makes the best watches in the world. And I think rewilding Chile, rewilding Argentina, and I, as the grandmother of Tompkins conservation, are really also in that class, the best rewilders in the world. And I like that high altitude position. I think we're really well matched. I think we're dogged about how to do things in a very aggressive, almost relentless way. And I see Rolex being equally relentless in what they try to do and turn out year after year. And so I'm very proud of that relationship from a Tompkins conservation point of view. And I know that rewilding Chile and rewilding Argentina feel exactly the same way.
Got you. Do you want to just explain to listeners what Tompkins conservation is and how it sort of fits into all of this?
Well, Tompkins conservation is the mothership of how we got started 30 years ago and how we built the teams who are today independent in each country. And so we continued to work together every day. But again, it was really important to me that they be independent, they have their own relationships, they form their own expanded strategies and leadership. And my role, and we have a few members of the team of Tompkins Conservation in the United States, is to support and expand their work.
Got you. And can you just explain how you guys work? You guys donate the parks you set up back to local governments. Does that, that all sounds brilliant. Presumably it's not all roses. Presumably it's sometimes, what are some of the, how does that work out in reality? That presumably has its challenges as lovely as it sounds?
Well, when you decide to donate not just the land, but years of work, essentially, by, as I mentioned earlier, hundreds of people and the infrastructure and so on, you're doing it knowing that nobody's going to take care of these parks the way we did. We know that. But that's a cost we're willing to accept, because we see it this way. If I bought a Picasso and I just hang it in my living room, my family, my friends can see that Picasso and ooh and awe. But if I take that same Picasso and I put it in the Met here in New York, millions of people see that, they learn something from it, they like it, they don't like it, it's immaterial. And we have always felt that this disconnection between we humans and the natural world is one of the drivers of what's taken place over the last 150 years. And we want everybody to be welcome into these parks. We would never have kept them private. That's the whole point for us, is that you go out hiking, you're from Santiago or you're from Paris, wherever you're from, and you go on these hikes and it starts snowing and you're miserable and you think, oh my God, I hate this. But these are the points in your life that you never forget. These are the things that remind you that you are of this You are a participant in this world. You may be cut off from it in your daily working life or your daily studies life, but that is the world that you come from. And that's how you get people to fall in love with the places that eventually they have to pivot and help protect. And in the absence of that joy and suffering as you come back into the natural world for Doug and me and all the teams, that's essential. And that's why we do it.
That's really nicely put. And just as you look forward, you've talked a lot. I get the impression you think a lot. You think long term a lot. I get the impression.
Yes.
But and in that spirit, what does the future look like for your conservation groups? You know, what do you are really? I get the impression you really are thinking about. I don't want to be like too morbid, but you're thinking about legacy and stuff here. What does the future look like for these groups for you?
Well, I don't think about Doug's legacy or my legacy. They are our legacy. So I only think of our good fortune in terms of how they do. And during the 6 weeks when I was last down there, we talked a lot about, I know how good they are. I've worked with the head of Argentina, Carolina Morgado, for 31 years, and for Sofia, the head of Argentina, for 25 years, and they are the best. So that's not enough for me, and I know they agree with me that they have to pivot and find the third generation and the fourth generation before something happens to them, because it's not enough that it just took place during the lives of Doug and Kris Tompkins, or it just took place during the lives of the people who they grew up working with. You have to push and shove this sense of relentlessness and that nothing is impossible, and build the framework for them to be successful long after we're gone. That's what matters to me.
Cool. Well, hopefully, long after we're both gone, people will still be listening to this podcast, to listen back and go, "Oh, they were right." Just if people who are listening now, though, what can they do to support your work? And maybe also, you talked a bit ago about, the importance of people having a connection to these spaces. I mean, what can they maybe do in their own sort of local world, to be a bit more connected? So what can they do for you, and what can they do for themselves locally?
Well, very specifically, we would love to see people support Rewilding Chile, Rewilding Argentina, which they can do directly. You just Google them, you will see how to find them. You'll see the details of what's going on in both countries, and find things that you can identify with and support them. That's the number one thing. In terms of what can people do wherever they are, I always say the same thing. The first thing is to decide that you don't want to abdicate your future. I think I look to myself in this every day as well. Right now, we're sort of allowing the future to unfold. Certainly people, if Greta, and there are people out there who are really trying to fight these trends. But basically, we need hundreds of millions of people, and so many just in the smallest and most local way, that there are groups in every village. There are individuals, small groups, maybe even large groups, who are trying to protect a local wetlands, or who are out there counting birds during April, who's going by. And people out there who are accountants, or whatever you do in your daily life, I promise you there are conservationists in that same town who need your help. Maybe they can't deal with numbers. Maybe they do need somebody to go who has more courage socially to go talk to the county mayor and just start in. Because in the absence of that, I think we ask ourselves, who are we? What are we doing? We're not just needing to live day to day. To participate in something that has nothing to do with ourselves is what I think I was looking for 32 years ago when I had it made in the shade. I could do anything I wanted. But I was missing that part of me that needed to participate in something that, and it can be the tiniest thing, but I promise whoever's listening, when you get started in your local town on conservation issues, you cannot imagine the roads that you'll be hauled down and the things asked of you, because everybody needs your help.
That's a good message. So get involved, basically.
Absolutely.
And just, I mean, I thought I knew quite a lot about your career, but learn a bit more today even. Just, I mean, looking back where it all started, could you ever imagined that you've achieved what you have today?
Oh, God, no. No, but our father, who died when I was quite young, I think it started there, that he always said, I don't care what you do, but try to be great at it. I mean, really great. Don't go for good, go for great. And I think I sort of live by that. And it's not that I'm great at everything. It's that that's what you're going for. And that all of us are so caught up in being fearful. Like, oh, I don't want to intrude. I don't want to question things, upset anybody. Go outside and upset somebody. There is a lot to be worried about, whether it's your neighbor or something as big as climate change. But climate change, don't worry about that as just one person in a town. There's so many things that you could do that can combat those things on the smaller scale. But go out and be great, and go find things that you love and fight like hell to protect them.
I love trying to be great. I'm going to take you literally on the go out and upset people. I'm going to go out and next time one of my environment stories doesn't end up on the front page, I'm going to get really gnarly with my editor. Okay, so let's finish off on a really sort of almost impossibly big question, Kris. Are you hopeful for the future of the natural world?
I've come not to really enjoy the word hope.
You don't like the hope question. No one likes the hope question.
It's not the question.
But the series is called Planet Hope.
No. I say this for a reason. If you ask me if I have hope, in some ways, and almost everybody I meet asks me if I have hope, in some ways, I feel like that's a kind of abdication on your part. That you're looking to me, well, Kris, if you've got hope, then I can have hope. And I think hope has to be earned. I think we have to fight and work hard to have hope. We have to earn it. And I think anybody who really thinks about that question would come to the same conclusion. So I am fearful about this century. I'm exceptionally fearful about the next 35 years. Because
those extinctions that you mentioned at the start.
Well, and Christ, look at the people, hundreds of millions of people who are impacted today because of climate, because of political scarcity, because of upheaval socially. I can't imagine so I get asked, what do you think about climate change? Do you think it's coming? Are you kidding me? Really? I almost become frantic. Are you not reading? Are you not understanding what's happening in Northern Africa? the southern islands of the South Pacific, Christ, Florida. It's here. This is not something that's slowly making its way as a threat. People are suffering at a scale that is unimaginable today. So no, I don't think it's smart or honest to say that this century is not in dire straits right now. And because you don't know those people in the Sudan, or because right now we Westerners, A, can probably get out of the way when it gets really bad, and B, we have a minor say in it, largely, vastly, the number of people around the world who have the greatest risk, have no say, and no way to get out of the way. And this comes from Sir David Attenborough. He's the one who said that at the last COP. And so yeah, no, it's not going to be, it is already not easy. So I have no tolerance for people trying to avoid what this century is looking like, not what it's going to look like, what it looks like right now. And the number of people impacted and how the aggregate of that number over the next 35 years, I think is really inhuman to imagine any other outcome at the moment.
Sure, and it's good to be honest about that. I mean, it sounded like you were driving at the start that the hope comes from almost your agency point, the point that people can get involved and still was that where the hope comes from? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think hope is only earned when we inform ourselves about the truth, whether it's local, regionally, nationally, internationally, and that you get out the front door and you go do whatever it is that you can to try to mitigate that on any level. Because again, in the absence of that, who are we when we know what's taking place now? And the urgency and the tragedy of it. What does it mean to be human if we are not willing to jump into the fray?
I think that's a great note to finish on. Thank you so much, Kris. It's been a real joy and a lovely birthday present chatting with you. Thank you so much.